If I could go back and learn Spanish again from scratch, I wouldn't try to study harder. I would try to avoid all of the mistakes that made everything feel so stressful and slow and humiliating sometimes along my journey to learn Spanish. Because Spanish itself, the Spanish language, was never the problem. It was the way I approached learning it that was the problem. So if I were going to do it all over again today, knowing what I know now, I would make progress a lot faster with a lot less effort and without ever feeling so stupid along the way. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what I would do differently to learn Spanish right now in 5 simple steps. And the good news is this works even if you're busy, even if you're not living in Spain or Latin America, and even if you've never tried to learn Spanish before. But first, let me show you some proof that this method actually works. When I was about 20 years old, I couldn't speak any Spanish, not through lack of trying. It's just that I'd been at it for a while, getting nowhere and almost given up a whole bunch of times. But then something happened one night that genuinely scared me. It was in Argentina and I was traveling up in the north, high up in the mountains. And I went up into the mountains maybe a bit faster than I should have done because I woke up in the middle of the night, one night feeling dizzy and not being able to breathe. Pretty terrifying. I ran out onto the balcony in the middle of the night, trying not to panic, trying to get some air into my lungs, and I grabbed the nearest thing that I could find, which was a book in Spanish. And so I sat down trying to keep calm, and I started reading this book in Spanish. And as I was reading, something strange was happening. See, the book was far too difficult for me. I've never read anything in Spanish before, but through sheer concentration, I realized I was able to follow more or less what was going on in the story, not word for word at all, but enough to understand the gist. It was a bizarre experience. I mean, I was used to speaking Spanish with people and not understanding anything, even words that I already knew. But here was an experience of being able to read something pretty hard and still being able to guess the meaning. Now, of course, that experience didn't magically fix my horrendous Spanish, but it did make one thing obvious. If I wanted to improve my Spanish and learn Spanish, I needed to do something different. I couldn't just carry on doing what I'd been doing all along and hope that it somehow turned out okay. I needed to have an actual plan. So if I was starting again now, this is where I'd begin. Now, it took me a while to understand why that night even works, and all I could think of was, well, was this just a fluke? I wasn't sure. So I looked for more Spanish books to read, and it just kept happening. If I just read the same paragraph a couple of times, it started to make sense, even though I didn't know all the words. See, it turns out I wasn't actually starting Spanish from zero. What I hadn't realized is how much English and Spanish already overlap. English and Spanish actually share a huge amount of common vocabulary. Boatloads of our words are almost identical. Animal, festival, criminal, total, normal. And then there are the ones that look unfamiliar at first, but your brain can still recognize them, especially if you see the written form. So you'll see a word like la nación on the page, and you get that little double take, like, hang on, that word looks a lot like nación, like nation. Turns out it's the same word. Same with words like importante or problema, posible. There are literally thousands of these words. So you're not learning any of these words from scratch. You can learn how familiar English words tend to adapt in Spanish. And once you see these patterns, it immediately unlocks probably about, I don't know, a quarter, a third of the language. You're not even translating, you're recognizing, and that feels way less stressful than trying to memorize a bunch of words. So check out this, for example, oportunidad, tranquilidad, simplicidad. All these Spanish words end in da, and they are essentially ITY words in English. Opportunity, tranquility, simplicity, they're identical. And if I was starting again, I would lean into this at the beginning. And it would blow your mind if you haven't recognized this already, the amount of vocabulary that will instantly make sense to you once your eyes start to see these patterns. And that is fundamentally what happened to me that night in Spanish. I wasn't doing anything clever. I was just seeing Spanish clearly for the first time. Now, once something like this starts working, it's very easy to assume that it will just keep working on its own, because when people say they've been learning Spanish for years, what they usually mean is they've been doing Spanish-shaped things without a clear target. A bit of this, a bit of that, some serious days, some days nothing. And every time you sit down, you're asking yourself, is this even the right thing to be doing right now in my studying? That is mentally exhausting, and it's one of the fastest ways to just kill your momentum. So if I was starting again, I would simplify the whole thing brutally. I would pick one honest, meaningful reason for learning Spanish right now, get clear on what my goals are, and make a clear plan for what I'm going to do each time I sit down to study. So I don't have to sit down on the day and think and decide and negotiate with myself. I'm not talking about a blood oath to be fluent here, just a rough idea of what I'm going to do every day so I have a plan. I actually made myself a language goal planner just for this, and it helps tremendously. Just 2 pages, takes about 10 minutes to fill in, and it gets 3 things straight very, very quickly. What you're focusing on over the next 3 months, what you're doing when you sit down every day, and a lot less of, wait, am I even doing this right? You also get to tick off each day that you show up, and that tiny sense of progress can really keep you going. Let's not pretend we don't like a dopamine hit here and there. Now, this goal planner, you can have it for free, you can print as many as you want, and once it's all set up, you stop wasting energy on decisions and actually put that energy into Spanish instead. If you'd like a free copy, just scan the QR code on the screen, or you can hit the link below in the description. Now, even with things finally starting to make sense, there was still a major part of my Spanish journey that completely wrecked my confidence. If Spanish wasn't actually all that foreign, all that different from English, why did I still feel so embarrassingly useless the moment that real people started talking to me? Let me tell you, that really came crashing down for me one night in Madrid. So I was in Spain, I went out one night with a friend in Madrid. There were loads of Spanish people, great atmosphere, everyone talking at once, and I remember thinking, okay, here we go, this is the real thing. This is where it finally happens to me, lots of Spanish. And then it was a car crash. I could catch a few words here and there, but they were flying past me so quickly, it was impossible to grab onto anything. It was a complete disaster. Next thing I knew, this was what I hated, was my friend who I was there with started translating everything that her friends were saying from Spanish into English, like I was some dumb tourist. And I was mortified. It was just humiliation, as only young, unconfident people can feel it. And I remember thinking, how am I this bad at a language that I've actually been working hard at? Now, what I didn't understand back then is that listening is one of the hardest skills at the beginning. And it has nothing to do with intelligence. When people speak, you don't control the speed, especially something like Spanish, which can be very, very fast. It can feel overwhelming when you only meet the language through sound. It's fast, everything runs together. Your brain has to hear these unfamiliar sounds, work out where one ends and the next one begins, figure out the meaning, all in real time. And that's a huge ask when everything is still new. It's just too hard to make out what you're hearing. Now, reading doesn't give you the same problem. With reading, you can slow things down, you can see all the words you already know on the page, and even look back and go back a sentence or a paragraph if you need to. Plus, it's the best way to start to work out how these cognates actually work. Remember the word nación? Well, if you only hear it spoken, you probably won't realize which word it is. You won't notice the connection with English because the accent can get in the way. Is it nación, nación? But if you see the word on the page, you make the link straight away. And once you've learned the basic building blocks of Spanish, you can, for sure, start reading really, really quickly. Think about all the advantages you've got. The alphabet is the same. You pronounce words the way that they are spelled in Spanish for the most part. You've got all of those cognates in the words that are the same, and even word order is basically the same. So subject, verb, object. So if I got a do-over, I would give myself a massive head start and just read, read, read. But here's the big thing. I would look for simple graded texts that come with matching audio, something like what we use in our story learning courses, for example, and our books of short stories. Story, reading, plus audio. Why audio? Because text and audio combined is a match made in heaven. See, when you read and listen together, your brain is able to match the sound with the words on the page. And it just makes sense. You can do something with that. And hey, if spoken Spanish had ever made you feel stupid in the past, that's not a sign that you're bad at languages at all. It just means you started in the hardest possible place. And for me, once I could recognize words on the page, listening finally had something to hook onto. But even then, I found a whole new way to sabotage my progress. And this is where I really started getting in my own way. In fact, this next mistake probably caused me the most stress overall, and it's one I see English speakers making all the time. See, after my horrible experience in Madrid, I tried to control the language. I became weirdly obsessed with grammar, especially verb endings and past tenses. And I'd be standing there in conversations I was having, trying to construct the perfect sentence in my head. And I remember thinking things like, hang on, before I say this, should I be saying hablé or hablaba or he hablado? I was working out this grammar on the fly while the conversation had already moved on to a totally different topic. And look, Grammar matters. Okay, I'm not anti-grammar. I'm not here to tell you that grammar is not important and you should not study it. Spanish does have tricky things to learn, but the danger is when grammar becomes the thing that you cling to at all costs because you're somehow terrified of getting grammar wrong. Because then you blow grammar up into this something enormous, and it holds you back from all the other things that actually matter in a conversation, the kind of natural interactions that actually count when you're speaking to somebody. And it's not about the grammar. What I understand now is that grammar is best learned when it answers some kind of question that you already have. Let me give you an example. Let's imagine that you keep hearing people say a phrase like, lo que pasa es que, which in Spanish means, the thing is that, or here's the thing. So you hear this phrase, and eventually you realize, okay, people keep saying these words in this order all the time, and you start to think, all right, okay, I recognize this now, I should probably start to understand how the grammar works. And this is where actually studying a bit of grammar can help. When it's explaining something your brain has already cottoned onto. So if I was starting again, I would learn grammar a lot more naturally. I'd still use a textbook and refer to it, but I'd be very picky about how I used it. Not to try to memorize Spanish grammar rules, and definitely not to work through it cover to cover, but to clear things up when something keeps blocking my understanding. And then the second I start getting my head about it, I would say, Ollie, this grammar thing, like, yeah, it doesn't matter. let's just move on. Trust me on this. Grammar tends to sort itself out over time. It should make things feel easier. And if it's making you tense, becoming the bane of your life, yeah, you're not ready for it yet. So speaking of getting in my own way, all of that helped, but it still didn't fix one big problem. See, I always wanted to be able to speak early on. The problem back then was how hard it was to actually speak. This was before apps. It was before you could just click a button and find someone online called Carlos who wants to practice English for half an hour. So I did something slightly unusual. I wandered around central London listening out for people speaking Spanish on the street. I'm not exaggerating. I would listen for people speaking Spanish, and when I heard someone speaking, I would do the only logical thing. I'd walk straight up to them and I would say, oh, sorry, this is going to sound a bit odd, but can we practice some Spanish together? And sometimes they would give me the look, but I got a few yeses from people working in shops and pubs and things, and when that would happen, I'd try and speak, and I would just parrot out the same old phrases that I would go, hola, ¿qué tal? Bien, bien. And honestly, although it was awful, it felt pretty liberating to get those little interactions. I realized that communicating with people was the reason I was doing this in the first place. But okay, this is not very good practical advice for most people. And it honestly didn't get me very far. If I was starting again today, I would remove all of that awkward friction immediately, and I would simply go online, find a language partner, and start speaking from day one. And I would keep those conversations deliberately low pressure. With a language partner, the goal is not to sound impressive. The goal is just to show up and say something, even if it's as simple as, I work in London, trabajo en Londres. I mean, these early conversations, they're not about saying everything right. They're about realizing that people will understand you anyway, even if you screw up. And this is a huge realization because that frees you up to speak and just not worry, not get in your head. So much of this language gets picked up through natural interaction. English and Spanish are very, very close culturally. If this were Thai or Mandarin, this would not be what I'd be recommending. Speaking like this is too difficult at the beginning, but with Spanish, you can. Oh, and one more very important thing, I would not waste any time worrying about which variety of Spanish am I going to learn. Spain, Mexico, Peru, whatever. It's all the same language underneath. There's only one small thing I would do differently though, and it's something I didn't handle brilliantly the first time. I would try to get proper professional feedback on my pronunciation in particular right at the beginning from a teacher. The idea here is not to try to sound perfect or lose my English accent, just to make sure that I wasn't quietly baking in tiny mistakes, because pronunciation tends to what's called fossilize. If you start to pronounce things wrong, you don't want to have to undo it later. And Spanish pronunciation, it's not wildly difficult, but it is different enough that things like certain vowel sounds or your kind of rolling R, or how to pronounce the jota, for example, they can stick with you without noticing. And to be fair, I speak Spanish now with a bit of a Canarian accent anyway, because I spent so much time in the Canary Islands. So, that's hardly standard Spanish. If I knew that that was how I was going to end up speaking, perfection is never the goal. The thing that finally locked Spanish in for me wasn't something I learned to do better. It was something I stopped doing altogether. And it was this: I stopped treating Spanish like a project. So when I was living in London, I met a guy from the Canary Islands. His name was Thomas. We became very close friends. We played music together, and I asked him to only speak Spanish to me, and that was actually not such a big problem because he had no interest in learning English at all. So really kind of convenient encounter. And we spent the next 2 years just hanging out and speaking Spanish all the time. And because this was his home language, there was no sense of right, let's improve your Spanish today, Ollie. It was just literally the language that we used on a daily basis to talk about whatever was going on, like music, parties, work, plans, whatever. And by this point, I'd done a ton of reading as well. So reading was doing a lot of the heavy lifting for me. I knew what Spanish looked like, and I knew the shape of the language. So now when I listened to podcasts, to watch movies, I was talking with Tomas, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was hearing words that I recognized. I was starting to populate the map, if you like. And somewhere along the way, I couldn't even tell you when, but Spanish stopped feeling like this fragile little thing where one wrong word would make the whole thing collapse. And it started holding together on its own. And it came from a lot of immersion. So if I were starting again, the part that I would do differently is this: I would build 1 or 2 places in my life where Spanish is the default. Not the goal, not the project, but the default. That might be a standing weekly conversation on Skype with what is this, 2015, on Zoom with the same person where we don't practice, we just talk, or one Spanish TV series that I watch, or a podcast that's always on when I'm out walking, because I do enjoy listening to podcasts. I would really row back on the hours of study. I would just start to set up things in Spanish so that Spanish is automatic in my life. And if we want to zoom right out, here is the whole path that I would follow if I was starting Spanish again. I keep my goal planner nearby, and then I would begin by leaning hard on cognates. These are the words that sound the same between Spanish and English. So I'm not treating Spanish like a completely new language. And the cognates I'd focus on would be the words that I knew that I'm likely to use in my real life. That's an advantage that's available to you. Going from English to Spanish, I would make the most of it. Next, I would read as much as possible from the start. Very simple stuff, and then bring in matching audio so I could read and listen at the same time. Books like my books of short stories. We have these 101 conversations. These are made for this kind of early listening. There's lots of this material out there. Next, I would pretty much leave grammar alone and let my understanding of it come naturally through exposure. I would start speaking early, using a language partner or maybe even a tutor, but I keep it low pressure. I'd use a website like LanguageTalk for that because they are awesome. And then I would focus on immersing in Spanish until it's just part of my normal life. Podcasts, music, Spanish friends, Mexican restaurants, movie, whatever. Which, as it turns out, is where things start getting really fun. When I think back now to all the ridiculous things I did just trying to be a proper Spanish speaker, it's crazy. It's the price of ignorance, really. Because the funny thing is, nothing about Spanish itself really changed. It was me that changed. And there's one more part of the story that made a massive difference to my listening in particular, and it's probably the bit that you'd expect to be the very worst idea. Well, that's where things really take a turn, and I'll show you exactly what I mean in this video right over here.